an expert quilter. I am not an expert quilter, but there are some things that I am an expert quilter can do. I know how exactly how to use my seam ripper, so and I'm an expert at finding a needle and threading a needle. I'm an expert at sewing a long way without using my bobbin to lay it out. I'm expert at buying too much material, which I imagine a lot of you are. And I'm an expert in thinking that all my material and all my projects will be finished before I die. I would say that I'm more of a hobbyist quilter, and I didn't start quilting until after I retired from teaching. In 2006, I was completely lost. So in January of 2007, I took my first quilting class, and my teacher is right back there, Gloria, was my first teacher of quilting. So thank her a lot. I learned a lot from Gloria. Okay, so revolutionary quilts, 1750 to 1800, are quite different than the ones that you would see today. The sewing machine had not been yet invented. It wasn't invented until 1847. Eli Whitney's cotton gin, although had been patented in 1794, seeds were still being separated from the cotton by hand. So you can see quilts were very different at that time. They were generally not artistic. Colonial women had their hands full just weaving fabric to make clothes. Blankets and coverlets were commercially made. Commercially made fabric was imported, and during the embargoes and other economic misfortunes, patching and combining blankets or using them as batting was the norm to ensure that the family kept warm. So their quilts were oftentimes just one piece of material, or if you look carefully, they're just pieces of material sewed together, because that's just what happened. And of course, you can imagine Revolutionary War quilts did not really survive. A few of them did, but it was just the times, and they didn't survive. Some of the surviving ones are whole cloth, like I said, just whole pieces, maybe sewed together. Um, they were very, very well made of large pieces sewn together to make just the bed size. Hexagons were a popular design at that time if they were adding designs. They were used for centuries, but not in the 20th century flower garden quilts. So most of the hexagons, and these are the flower gardens that you see around, were 20th century patterns. But they did use hexagons in the Revolutionary War. Medallion quilts were also very popular during that time period. The Tree of Life quilt, which you might have seen or researched, is one of the few surviving quilts of that time, and it was made between 1780 and 1800, even though some will debate that date. It is a medallion quilt made by taking a piece of material that had flowers on it. The material would have been imported, usually from India, because that's where the material was printed. And then this lady had cut out the flowers, and then she put them on a blank piece of material. And so then she hand applicated around the flowers. And so because it was probably pretty expensive to buy the material in the first place and to be able to cut up a piece of material and to make it, it has survived because it probably was not used much at all. So I do have a picture of it. I'll leave it up here, and you can see it that the detailed work is quite fine in the Tree of Life, and this was a Revolutionary War made quilt, or at that sort of at that time. Okay, so now we want to talk about this quilt. So I will sort of stand at the side here. Um, it was designed and offered through the Common Threads Quilting Company. The Common Threads Quilting Company was owned by Denise Hipscomb, she quilted for over 20 years, and she designed the quilt. Okay, and then it was named um, Patriots in Petticoats because Patriots are Revolutionary War ladies, and she designed the quilt to honor who played played a very important part in the American Revolution. So each one of these blocks represents a lady that was important during the Revolutionary War. Okay, the center block there is to represent Martha Washington, and then the other 15 blocks are to represent other ladies at the Revolutionary War time. The finished quilt size is 98 by 98. Uh, and Denise worked closely with the Daughters of the American Revolution to maintain the historical accuracy of the fabrics of the quilt and of the stories of the women. Okay, so where did she go and get the material designs? Because this isn't Revolutionary War material. Okay, but where did she go and get designs to reproduce the material? Well, she went to the Daughters of the American Revolution National Building in Washington, D.C. And if you ever go there, there's a museum in our headquarters, the DAR. There's drawers and drawers of old quilts that you can pull out and read stories about. Wow. Okay, so one of the quilts then was that they pulled out, and she took the designs from this lady's quilt and material patterns. Uh, this one was made in 1840, and she patterned it after. And the quilt was originally made by Hannah Wallace. And Hannah was a Quaker. Her father was Samuel. He was a land king. He bought huge tracts of land in Pennsylvania. And if she made this quilt in 1840, she would have been about 60 years old when she made the quilt. So she and her husband had 3 children. And one of the boy went to New York, and the 2 girls stayed there in Pennsylvania. This is kind of interesting, I thought. In 1850, that's when the first census was taken in the United States to count everybody at that time. So in 1850, with the first census to list every person, Hannah was living with her daughter, Cassandra, and her husband. So anyway, they looked at her quilt, and then they reproduced the most elegant patterns. So that's where these patterns came from. That's why it does look old pattern. And as a DAR person, I knew that this is what I wanted to do and that I would enjoy making. So, and then I should tell you that we have had this quilt appraised. And because I have the stories of the different blocks, the different ladies, and I can give lessons or I can give presentations on it, that boost your value. I did not know that until they praised it. But if you have things to go with it, that boosted it all up. I didn't realize that at the time. So it's kind of good to know they need to stay together. All right, so this is the first block, and it was these were blocks of the month. So you got a block, and then you got a story of one of the DAR or one of the revolutionary ladies, and then you made it. So there's 15 blocks, so we have 15 stories in Torrey. I'm not going to kill you all. You would be here forever. So I only picked out the most interesting ones that I thought would be more interesting to you. Anyway, so here was the first block. And if you have a third grader, if you have a grandchild who's been in third grade, they probably have read about Deborah Sampson. Teachers would know that. She was the first known American woman to impersonate a man in order to join the army and take part in combat. When she was 21, Deborah enlisted in the Massachusetts Regiment of the Continental Army. She was tall for her age and tall for being a woman, and she bound her breasts very tightly to look more like a man. Deborah was wounded in the leg in a battle near Tarrytown, and she tended to her own wounds so that she would not be discovered. As a result, her leg never healed properly. She was later hospitalized with a fever in Philadelphia. The doctor attending her discovered that she was a woman and made discreet arrangements for her to be discharged. She was later awarded a pension of $4 a month. So there is a statue in her hometown that the DAR has erected. Anyway, it's in front of a library. Maybe someday I'll get to see it. All right, here was the second block that we got. I always waited until I got the block finished before I read that story, because that gave me incentive. I gotta finish that block before I can read the story about the woman. So anyway, this was Anne Bailey, and we'll find out why her name was changed to Mad Anne. She came to America. She was born in England. She came to America in 1761. She settled in the Shenandoah Valley. She married Richard Trotter, and they lived near the present city of Covington, Virginia. Trotter was fighting Indians, her husband, and he was killed. So that made her mad, and she was out to get the Indians for killing her husband. She dressed in a male buckskin. She rode a black stallion named Liverpool. Reportedly, she was an excellent shot and absolutely fearless, and became an Army courier and scout, receiving regular Army pay and rations. But because of her hatred of Indians, they were terrified of her, and they called her Mad Anne. She enlisted in the Army, in Captain Hunt's Army. She quickly rose to the rank of corporal, but we don't know exactly how she earned that. In less than 3 weeks, though, she deserted with reasons unknown. Captain Hunt swore out a warrant for her arrest. He discovered that she was a female. The court fined her 50 pounds, and she was given 2 years in prison for appearing in men's clothing. That was the reason for being jailed. In 1785, she married John Bailey, and after his death, she moved close to her son. Now, those people that are 70, how many of you built a cabin by yourself? That's what she did. At the age of 70, she built her own log cabin and lived there until her death. And she was 83. Right there. This was the next block that we got. And this is quite an interesting one. She was from New York, and you might suspect that the DAR in New York has a lot of money. So we'll find out what they've done with the money, some of it. Margaret Cochran Corbin fought alongside her husband in New York and was the first woman to receive a pension from the United States government as a disabled soldier. She was born in 1751. She was orphaned at the age of 5, so she was raised by her parents, her relatives. She married John Corbin when she was 21 years old. When the Revolutionary War started 4 years after their marriage, John joined the Continental Army, and of course, she went with him. And on November 1776, Fort Washington was attacked by the British. And to run a cannon at that time, or any time, I guess, if you're running a cannon, it always takes 2 people to run the cannon. So John was assisting the gunner when the gunner was killed. So John took charge of the cannon, and who was the one that assisted him? His wife, Margaret. Sometime later, John was also killed. Now we just have Margaret. She did both things on the cannon herself. With no time to grieve, Margaret continued loading and firing the cannon herself until she was wounded by a grape shot, which tore her shoulder, mangled her chest, lacerated her jaw. The fort was eventually captured by the British. Because she was an injured soldier, she was released. She didn't have to go to prison. But she never really recovered from her wounds and was left without the use of her left arm. In 1779, the Continental Congress granted Margaret a pension due to her distinguished bravery, and she died near West Point prior to her 50th birthday. In 1926, the Daughters of the American Revolution had her remains removed from where they were, and they put them with the other soldiers behind the old cadet chapel at West Point, where a monument can be seen today. You can't really see it, and you can come up afterwards and look at any of these pictures. But anyway, but remember, she was from New York, and New York ladies have money. But a recent disturbance at that graveside led to an archaeology study where she was buried. And the remains thought to be Margaret's had been moved to West Point, were in fact a male's. That's not where her body is buried. And that was done in 1926. Okay, so they had a rededication in 2018 at the Margaret Corbin Monument at West Point to honor her. But where is she buried? While the true remains of Margaret Corbin could be lost for time, that hasn't deterred the Daughters of the American Revolution from looking into this situation in order to bring greater awareness to Margaret's story. And hopefully, one day, they'll find her remains in order to give her the proper burial that she needs. I don't know. They're still spending money on it, I'll tell you. Anyway, so this was block 4. And yeah, the colors are quite unique, aren't they? I thought to take somebody's old quilt and to get the right colors and the right designs. Elizabeth Gilmore came to America from Ireland in 1776. She was inspired by the Revolutionary cause, and she enlisted along with her sister as a nurse in the Continental Army. She drew pay as a private. She served at Valley Forge during the long winter of 1777-1778, where she met her husband, John Barrett, whom she married in 1780. Tradition says that she dressed in man's clothing so as to march beside her husband until the end of the war. For 4 years after the war, Elizabeth was engaged as a ranger, carrying a rifle and serving as a scout. Her pay records list her among the Rangers in the frontier. And to be in DAR, you don't have to have a soldier connection. You could be connected with a nurse that worked in the Revolutionary War. You could be connected with a farmer who gave food to the Revolutionary War soldiers. So everybody, a lot of people think, oh, you just have to have a soldier who, no, you don't, to be in DAR. As long as you can prove that your relative is connected with the Revolutionary War. Your records are all proven. This is Sarah Brandy. On a cold, well, this one you'll recognize right away when I get into it. On a cold December evening, Sarah and her husband, John Fulton, were at the house of Sarah's brother, Nathaniel Bradley. In the kitchen, Sarah and her sister-in-law disguised Nathaniel, John, and the other men as Mohawk Indians, complete with war paint. So I can guess what's going to happen now. Their husbands are all disguised as Mohawk. She is recognized as a Revolutionary War because she was there putting the paint on their faces. Okay. At the appropriate hour, a large band of Patriots disguised as Mohawks burst through the South Meeting House, heading toward the three ships from London: the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, which were loaded with tea, yes, from the East India Company. Quickly, the Sons of Liberty boarded each of the ships. Once on board, they went to work striking the chests of tea and dumping them into the sea, rhyming words. By 8 o'clock that night, they had emptied a total of 342 crates of tea into the Boston harbor. And because she was there at the very, very beginning doing the war paint, she is called by some the mother of the American Revolution. And if you came to hear about the quilt, sorry. This is Mary Pickersgill, and you'll recognize this one right away too. Mary Young Pickersgill was also asked by Major George Armistead to make a flag. What's going to happen? Now, this story takes place in the War of 1812. But that's when the British came back over here and decided they still wanted to fight us. They still wanted our country. So that's why the connection to the Revolutionary War was because of that. And if you've got a granddaughter who's got an American Girl doll, that was the girl from 1812. And this very same, it was during this period. So anyway, George Armistead said to make a flag so large that the British could have no difficulty seeing it from a distance. In 6 weeks, with the help of her daughter, 2 nieces, and 2 African American servants, they used over, how many yards of material do you think that huge flag was? 400 yards of material. 400 yards. And just getting that material that much at that time would be something. With 400 yards of fabric, she made a flag so large that it could be seen for several miles. Francis Scott Key saw Mary's flag while he was held captive in the British ship and was inspired to compose the poem that became our national anthem. Okay, now that flag, 400 yards, how many pounds do you think that flag weighed? It was also 30 feet by 42 feet in size. It was 50 pounds, and it took 9 people, 9 men, to raise it over the fort. Okay, and in the course of time, of course, it was hanging in the Smithsonian National Museum in Washington, D.C., and they hung that flag straight up and down like this quilt was hung. Okay, that much weight, and over time, and of course it was pulling and stretching and coming apart and deteriorating. They should have never hung it straight up and down in the first place. So the American Daughters of the American Revolution decided to in 1998 to take that flag and to restore it. Okay, so how in the world are you going to restore such an old flag? They laid it on a platform, and then I'll show you the picture in a minute. Then they had a frame over it that would move across it like this. And in order to mend and to sew that flag, the ladies had to lay down flat on their stomachs and sew down like this to get it restored. So anyway, I have a picture in here. Welcome to see it later. But you can see the framework. The ladies laying down and putting that flag back together again at the tune of $7 million. Yeah, $7 billion. Anyway, so now then, when they hang it, they don't hang it all the time, and it's not straight up and down anymore. It's at a slant, so it can't be pulled and so forth and stretched and so forth. And they don't keep it out all the time, but when they do, it's on a platform that's at a slant. Original flag. Yeah, it's the original one. Okay, so our next story is Hannah Hendy. And remember I told you that in 1812 and during the Revolutionary War, the British hired Indians to come and capture boys and young men and make them be soldiers for the British. Okay, it happened both times. So this is a little story that goes with that. During the night, a band of Indians led by the British troops raided farms near this town in Vermont, stealing men and boys to sell for the British. After being warned, Hannah Hendy took her son and her daughter and headed for the woods, while her husband went off to warn the other farm families. The Indians caught her 7-year-old son, Michael. After the initial shock, Hannah headed upriver in pursuit of her son. She's got her daughter with her, too. When she located the gathered British people, she demanded to speak to their leader, Captain Horton. When he told her he could not control the Indians, she threatened him. You are their leader, and they must and will obey you. So it really is his decision for this to happen. Okay, when her son was brought in, she took him by the hand and she refused to let him go. An Indian threatened her and jerked the child away again. She definitely took him back again and said that she would follow them all the way to Canada and never give up. They would not have her little boy. Finally, intimidated by her determination, Captain Horton told her to take her son and leave. During this time, other little boys were brought into the camp. Hannah interceded for them just as she had for her own son. Finally, as the day was ending, Hannah Hendy left camp with her son and her daughter and 9 small boys. Okay, so it's at nighttime and they have to cross a river. And remember, the ladies have their full dresses on and so forth. So each one of the kids takes a hold of her skirt all the way around and she goes across the river. And then she sleeps and very cold and wet during the night, and then they all get back home. Okay, this is Nancy Hart, and anyway, like I said, if you want to belong to the Daughters of the American Revolution, and you had something about feeding the revolutionary people, yeah, you can get in. So this is one of her things. There were several legends about Nancy Hart, but this one seems to be the most true. The soldiers demanded that she cook them a turkey from her own yard. She sent her daughter to the well for water. Secretly told her to blow the conch shell to warn her husband and the neighbors. Now, on the East Coast, they would blow conch shells. Back here in the Midwest, what did we used to have to do to warn our neighbors? Ring that bell out there. But in the East, it's different. She agreed to feed the soldiers, and as they entered the house to eat, they stood their guns by the door inside the cabin while they were eating. She had an idea. So as they were eating and drinking, she was pushing their weapons through a hole in the cabin out. So they didn't have the rifles. Okay. One man, I'm sorry, she grabbed one of the remaining guns and told the men not to move. One man ignored her and she killed him. Another made a move and she killed him also. She held the remaining men captive until her husband, Benjamin Hart, arrived along with the neighbors. According to legend, Benjamin wanted to shoot the captives, but Nancy insisted that they be hung from a tree. Uh, so, in proof of this, many years later, in 1912, construction workers were working on a railroad. They were grading the ground. And they seemed to verify this incident because while they were grading for this railroad site less than a mile from the old Hart cabin, the workers found 5 or 6 skeletons buried in a row, and they were estimated to have been buried for about a century, which would made the story very true. About 1830, John Hart took his mother to Kentucky to live near relatives, and she died in 1830 and is buried in the Hart family cemetery near Henderson, Kentucky. But this cabin that she lived in at the time when she was feeding the soldiers and so forth, they've made a replica of that cabin, and it's back in Georgia. So you could go visit this little cabin where she had the turkey dinner for them. Okay. This is Elizabeth Freeman, and we do have um, Black Americans in our DAR, and they were connected too because they were servants and so forth of the soldiers. So if you're connected with them, you are very much allowed to come into DAR. The only trouble is it's very, very hard to prove that because their records weren't kept. Anyway, this is a story about Elizabeth Freeman. She was called Momet. She was born a slave about 1742. Her owners gave Elizabeth and her daughter, our sister Eliz, to John Ashley as a wedding gift. So she was passed on to John Ashley, she and her sister, and she worked for him as a slave. Um, the family story suggests that Momet decided to seek her freedom after she blocked a blow that was from a shovel that was aimed at her sister. The blow caused serious damage from which she never fully recovered the use of her arm. But Momet was inspired by a public reading of the Declaration of Independence. And so she turned to the lawyer in town and said, I need help. I want my freedom. I've heard the Declaration of Independence. That means I should be free. So anyway, the lawyer's name was Theodore Sedgwick. And in the spring of 1781, she brought a suit for freedom against her owner, John Ashley. Sedgwick's principal argument stated that slavery was inherently illegal under the newly ratified Massachusetts Constitution. She won her freedom. The jury agreed to free Moment, and her owner then wanted to appeal, but then he withdrew. But what's going to happen to her now? Where is she going to get work? Well, Moment worked as a paid servant in that lawyer's house from then on. And she is the only non-Sedgwick buried in the inner circle of the Sedgwick family plot in Massachusetts. And that's very unusual for somebody that you paid to work for you to be in the family circle. Anyway, this is what is on her tombstone. Elizabeth Freeman, known as the name of Moment, died December 28, 1829. She was born a slave and remained a slave for nearly 30 years. She could neither read nor write, yet in her own sphere she had no equal. She neither wasted time nor property. She never violated a trust nor failed to perform a duty. In every situation of domestic trial, she was the most efficient helper and the tenderest friend. Good mother, farewell. Elizabeth Freeman used the principles for which the Americans fought to win her freedom and help in slavery in the state of Massachusetts. So, and I don't usually include this, but if you would like to hear the story about Martha Washington, and you know all about Martha Washington past, that I can share a few little facts, and that'll be the last one that I'll share with you. Each year of the Revolution, when the Continental Army settled in for the winter, George Washington wrote for his wife to join him at camp. Although she preferred staying at home, she would head north to be with her husband because she supported the idea of freedom and because, as General Lafayette once observed, she loved her husband madly. As early as 1775, the general feared that Martha might be kidnapped by the governor of Virginia and hold her hostage. So he urged her to leave Mount Vernon and stay with family and friends. Martha spent time with her husband on numerous occasions during the winter of 1775 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in spring of 1776 in New York, in spring of 1777 in New Jersey. In the winter of 1777-78, Martha traveled 10 days to be with her husband at Valley Forge. Her main job, once she got there, was to care for her husband. She also assumed the role of hostess at the camp, entertaining the wives of the senior officers. She also lent her name to support a formal effort to enlist women of the colonies to volunteer on behalf of the Continental Army. On her early trips to stay with her husband, Martha was celebrated along the way. Patriots wanted to honor the wife of George Washington. Dinners were held in her honor, and groups presented her with lavish gifts. But they say the biggest contribution gave to the Revolutionary War was because of her son, John Curtis, who died of camp fever at the age of 26, serving as a civilian aide to General George Washington. Anybody have questions or anything they'd like to add or stories? Yes, Sue?
I just think it's interesting what you decided. You weren't going to read the stories until you got that story. And I just think that's a cool thing for you to decide that's my motivation. And was it neat then when you read the story?
Right, it was, because I hadn't contacted, I hadn't connected with a lot of these ladies. And PAR also has a book that's published of the ladies that were connected with the Revolutionary War too. So that meant more to me afterwards because I didn't know about that book. But I just finished another quilt that had letters. And so I did the same thing. I would not read the letter until after I finished that block. So it's now getting a binding. So it's almost finished and I can give stories on it. So I like things that are connected with stories. That's oh, I've done a lot of presentations on it because I was a district director for DAR, and that's one of the things you have to do is to give lessons, and so I gave the same one to all of our district chapters, but I've given it to several different places. Well, I don't know, it was a 12-month thing, so I would imagine a good year, and then probably another 6 months to get it finished up and quilted and so forth. And don't forget, girls, it's very important when you make a quilt. I'm sure all of you know to put your information on the back of when it was finished and when it was finished. It's on there. It's on there somewhere. But yeah, very important. Don't forget to do that because that grounds it. And you're also, I've never done it. You're also supposed to register in Illinois as a quilt. Yeah, there is a form. There is a form. I have it at home. I've never done it. Go ahead. Did you do that through Peggy Mills? I did it. Yeah, that's where you got the. Yeah, but it wasn't there in Philosophic. Yeah, Peddler's Way. Peddler's Way. Yeah, right. Yeah, before that. Yeah, but I didn't know that. I only knew it was Peddler's Way. Yeah, but that's where I got it. Yeah, and you can't buy the kit anymore. When they do things like this, they only produce a certain number. And once it's gone, it's gone. And so you can't buy any of this material. It's just limited. That makes the price of the books go up. Go ahead.
Anything about quilting?
Oh, sure.
The kits that came with the squares, is the rest your own discretion as to
No,
what you use?
no, they were part of the
It
kit
all
too.
comes.
It all came together, and no, and it's not cut. I mean, they just give you the material, and hopefully you don't make a mistake. Because if you make a mistake, then you don't have enough material to finish your. So you look twice and cut once. Yes. Go ahead, Sue.
So you're saying that everybody who made this quilt,
Right.
they're all like
Right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. We all have the same material all over the country. Yeah. But they only make certain. I have no idea. No. Did you have a question earlier? Oh, okay. Anybody else? And always keep with it your appraisal. So they're with it. So yeah. And if you want to look at my appraisal papers, you can. They're back here in the back. No, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
But if you would like to know, I can tell you. This was done a few years ago, so it was appraised at $5,250.
That's the insurance type value.
Right,
It's
that's-
not the value of the quilt itself. If you double it.
Right. That's the insurance. You're right. Right. Not that you never could replace anything. Any others? Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Is it hand
Mine's machine folded.
and there wasn't a
I
really
am
big-
not as fancy as some of my friends. I do not hand quilt. By the time I get it all pieced, get it out of my house. Let somebody else finish this up. And this was quilted. This is an all-over pattern. It's not specifically done. It's just an all-over pattern. And my friend up north did it, and she was probably in her 80s when she did it. And so there are some mistakes. I know I had some mistakes probably too, but, so don't look real, but I appreciate it. And she doesn't quote for me now. Anyway.
Do you have
No, no, no. Well, ask my husband. He'd like to know why I'm gonna do it too. But anyway, no, it's folded and so forth. You're really, if you've got an extra bed that you don't do very often, every quilt that you make, you should spread it out on your quilt, right, girls? So it doesn't have the folds and so forth. And if you do fold it, every once in a while refold it so it doesn't have those permanent creases.
Is it true that you don't ever store them in plastic?
Right, you do not. Put them in a cloth or something.
Pillowcase.
Right, pillowcase, but do not put it in plastic. That's a good question because a lot of people think that's okay. It draws a mineral or whatever from the plastic, and that's not good.
Someone told me that years ago, and I have my grandmother who made it in the 50s.
Right, right.
But it's coming apart.
Oh, yeah.
Huh?
Did you have it hanging or something?
No, I just have it rolled up on top of that.
How
Up
come
on the
it's
right.
coming apart?
Well, it came apart when Mom had it, before my mom died.
Threads deteriorate, and they do deteriorate.
It's like it's just the material.
Right. It will do that, and don't have it in the sun if you can possibly not have it in the sun. That deteriorates too.
And there's no way to. Is there a way to make those back like they were? They cost you a fortune. I don't know how they do it.
It would probably never be the same.
Yes.
Some people can, repair quilts.
Yeah.
I don't know that much
I
about
don't
it.
even think I would try it. I mean, I would do it.
Yeah,
Some
yeah.
people that can repair it.
Yeah. Anyway, anybody else? This is quite interesting. I appreciate you all being here. And thank you for inviting me. I'll let the notebook up here until I get ready to leave, and you can go through it if you like.